And as we mark International Women's Day, we wanted to raise the basic question of what does it mean to be a woman? But we really wanted to focus on intersectionality in the answer. For so long, the ideas of femininity and womanhood we have been presented with have been based on the experiences of middle and upper class heterosexual white women. That's a narrow scope that leaves out perspectives of race, class, sexuality, abilities, and more. So we're broadening that scope with this panel. Please welcome Dr. Jill Andrew, Vivek Shraya, Mayan Ziv, and Sana Saleh. Thank you all for joining us. And I wonder if we could just kick it off with a brief explanation of intersectionality for those who don't know. It's a bit of a buzzword, but it's a concept that can be confusing to some. So Dr. Jill, can you give us sort of the Coles Notes TV-friendly version?
I just want to say that intersectionality was coined by the great legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. So I'm going to give it a go. In my opinion, intersectionality underscores the multidimensionality of our lives. You know, it's an analytical tool that we can apply to get a better understanding of how all the parts of us who make us who we are, how that brings a more wholesome person to society. And beyond that, it's not just about the wholesome person, but intersectionality provides a lens in which we can look at how systems of power and systems of oppression, like anti-Black racism, like white supremacy, like fat phobia, like transphobia and homophobia, how those differently impact people based on their social locations, based on their gender, based on their gender identity and expression, based on their body size. You know, I'm a Black woman. I can't disaggregate those two, and I don't want to, you know, but society likes to compartmentalize us, you know, and the reality is I can't talk to my experience of sexism without also talking about the experience of racism and class and sizeism and how that impacts the totality of what I experience as a woman in this world.
Good explanation. So Vivek, let's dive into this, beginning with you. As a trans person, what does being a woman mean to you?
Well, for me, womanhood is a really complicated idea because I really believe that gender extends beyond the binary of man and woman. So for me, you know, a day like International Women's Day, it's about honoring women, but it's also about honoring femininity broadly, however someone, you know, defines femininity, because I've experienced firsthand, you know, on the flip side, how the hatred or dislike of the feminine isn't just something that's applied to women.
Yep, that makes sense to me. And how do you, Vivek, how do you identify?
For me, it depends the context that I'm in, but I use the word trans. I also will use non-binary, you know, depending on which context I'm in, it really depends.
Okay. Mayan, I'm going to ask you the same question that I first asked Vivek. You live with muscular dystrophy, and I'm wondering, what does womanhood and being a woman mean to you at the intersection of ableism?
It's a good question. Growing up, I didn't really think about my disability at all. And it wasn't until I kind of forged my own identity out in the world as a young woman that I started to realize that there were certain things that were, you know, carried by people's assumptions that were really shaping who they thought I was. And although, you know, I felt like a strong, confident woman, there were certain ideas and assumptions about what I was able to do based on my disability alone before people would talk to me or ask me any questions. And so, you know, as a concept, ableism is really about the objectification or the discrimination of people with disabilities. And understanding that I am both disabled and that I am a woman and that I am confident and strong and able is really the intersectionality that I experience, as well as the fact that I'm Jewish and as well as the fact that I live in Toronto. And, you know, there's so many different things that comprise my identity to who I am today. And often, you know, when people talk about me or if I'm in the news or in an article, it's disabled woman. As opposed to, you know, women with a disability or, you know, entrepreneur, or there's so many different facets. So I think often people lead with the disability, which is fine as long as there's an understanding of why they are doing that and the power behind it, as opposed to seeing it as a negative in my life.
Over to Sana now. You and your husband have become massively popular on TikTok and YouTube, and you say your goal for your content creation is to educate the world on misconceptions surrounding Muslims and Islam. So when it comes to your womanhood, what are some of those misconceptions you faced as a Muslim woman, and how would you correct them? Not that it's your responsibility, but how would you correct them? Tell us a little bit more about what your truth is.
I feel like the media in general, or media as a whole, has really termed or coined Muslim women that wear hijab in particular as either oppressed or controlled or deprived. And people don't really realize that choosing to cover my body, choosing to wear a headscarf is my choice and it's my right. And I feel like everybody likes to throw the word feminism around, but then at the same time, they're like, oh, you're oppressed, or someone is forcing you to wear that. Whereas feminism stands for choice. And in all honesty, it's my choice to wear the headscarf. And I never actually wore it growing up. I spent 20 plus years without wearing it. So I've been on both sides of the coin. I've seen what it's like not wearing it and wearing it. And truly, it's boosted my confidence. It's my identity. I love being identified as a Muslim woman. So in terms of misconceptions and clearing that up for people, what we do on social media is we throw in education and comedy, and we put a spin on it, and we just love to educate through humor. And a lot of that is honestly just talking about what hijab is, because it's such a foreign thing. I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what it's for, why I wear it. And so truly, that's the easiest way to educate, I think, is through just learning in general, being open-minded, and just learning about what it means to people like me.
I think that's lovely that you're doing that, and really smart. Over to Dr. Jill now for a moment. We talked a little bit about intersectionality and how it's intrinsically linked and tied to the Black feminist movement. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what it means to be a woman from that perspective.
I think we have to sort of unpack feminism, going back a step even before Black feminist thought or Black feminisms. Feminism, for all it's been good for, has really prioritized the voices of white, heterosexual, middle-class women, able-bodied women, folks who, are very different from many of us on this show today. So what intersectionality does is it allows us to hear the voices and the lived experiences of Black women, of Indigenous women, of trans women, of women of color, of women with disabilities, of women from different classes. It complicates this idea that you are only a woman and that woman is the standard as white, or that white is the default. We know that is not the case. And I cannot express enough how problematic it can be when we get stuck in these binaries, because what that does is it shuts down a conversation, and it shuts down a deeper understanding of the way in which power imbalances, systems of oppression, policies, laws, how those impact our intersectional lives differently. That said, I also want to make it clear that I can only speak about being a Black, queer, fat woman, because that's who I am. This notion of what it means to be a woman, that itself, I think, also sort of slips into that sort of a biological conversation, as though there's, one woman, like there's this blueprint, and I'm still learning, and I'm still processing, and I'm still becoming who I am, and that shifts every day. So it's a big conversation. It's a big conversation.
Oh my gosh, it's a big conversation, and it evolves, and it's important that we even just, scrape the surface. So I really appreciate the education. I appreciate all of you being so candid with your experiences. Thank you to all of you for being part of this chat and for joining us today. We're so happy to share all these different perspectives.